Okay, welcome. Before we start or continue in our daily learning of Ein Yaakov, let's talk a little bit about today. It's the 10th of Teves, which is commemorated as a fast day. We don't eat or drink, starting in the morning by sunrise and going all the way till nightfall. It's the shortest fast. In the Northern Hemisphere, it's the shortest fast that we have because it's winter and it gets dark early and it gets light late.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty short fast. You can even wake up early in the morning and eat before the fast starts, as long as you made that condition before you went to sleep. If you don't make the condition before you go to sleep, then technically when you wake up, the fast starts, even if it's not really the morning yet. We're past that. We're almost the end of the fast. What's the reason for this fasting? What happened on this day? So there are several elements that bring to a fast day, especially this one. And first, the 10th of Teves was the day when Jerusalem went under siege by the Babylonians at the time. The king of Babylon, he surrounded the city of Jerusalem. They breached. They managed to get in on the 17th of Tammuz, which is why it's a fast day then in the summer. And 3 weeks later, sadly, tragically, they destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. They burnt it down. And many Jews were killed. Many Jews were taken into slavery. It was a very, very difficult time. And really, we see it as the beginning of all the exiles that followed, even though that was from the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. However, the second Beis Hamikdash, although it was rebuilt, it wasn't in its full glory the way it was by the first Beis Hamikdash. Still missing some of the elements. And in a sense, that first destruction never really came back. So all the suffering the Jews had since then is seen as, in a way, that it began on the day of 10th of Teves when that surrounding of Yerushalayim took place.
But I thought there are a lot of Jews in Babylon. There's a whole Babylon.
There was after that, absolutely.
Oh.
We didn't just survive, we thrived. But it was a very difficult period, and exile in general, although we have the Mishnah and the Talmud and so on, and many works of Jewish many works of Jewish thought and so on, but it's not it's still exile. It's still an issue. When our sages talk about it, it says Somach Melech Bavel, that the Babylonian king. It's a way of saying surrounded, but normally that word means supported. It's a strange term to use for surrounded the city. It's like leaning on the city, but the way that it's normally used, that word usually means supported, which is the opposite of destroying. It's the opposite of surrounding. Why do our sages choose this term of Somach Melech Bavel? So the Rebbe discusses this, and the Rebbe says that Somach is really a support. There's two ways to look at what happened. On the one hand, this day is a terrible day because it's commemorating such a thing. The beginning of all the exiles, in a sense, started with the siege on Yerushalayim. At the same time, Hashem was hoping that it's only going to be a warning sign, and it's never really going to come to fruition. He was supporting the Jewish people in their efforts and hoping that they're going to return to him and behave properly and fix whatever has to be fixed in their behaviors and in their observance of Torah mitzvahs. So the term Samach represents that. And indeed, Hashem sent many prophets to the Jewish people initially to warn them or forewarn them of the upcoming destruction. They didn't listen. One of them was even killed. And when Yirmiyah came, he was imprisoned. It was Jeremiah, the prophet. The point is that this day, while it's the beginning of a lot of tragic things that happened, it was Hashem's kindness in a way of getting us to turn around and hoping that he won't come to the destruction. That's why the siege was here for 30 months. And that's why it says Samach. And being that this was the beginning, it also has the tremendous potential that it should turn out the way that Hashem hoped for initially, which is that it should be a good thing and a good holiday. And indeed, when Mashiach comes, it's going to be a great Yom Tov. It's going to be a day of rejoicing, celebrating, and so on, because all this sadness and tragedy will be behind us. Another thing that's associated with this fast day is the translation of the Chumash, the Bible, the 5 books of Moses, into 70 languages. Into Aramaic, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
What happened was, Talmai the king, he gathered or took 70 sages, and he had them separated in different rooms. They couldn't talk to each other, had no way of accessing, no way of communicating, and he had them translate the entire Torah into Greek.
Mm-hmm.
So I said Aramaic, into Greek. And
Who is this?
his name was Talmai the king.
Of Babylonia.
Yeah. Now it's seen as, our sages saw this as a very terrible thing, as I'll explain in a moment. But there are 13 places in the Torah that they deliberately modified the meaning for the translation. Some words and some verses, when you say it in its original Hebrew, you read it one way. If you know the context, you know how to translate it. But if you translate it in Greek or even any other language, just literal or in the same order, then it could be misinterpreted if you want to. For example, Torah begins, Bereshis bara Elokim. In the beginning, God created. But the literal translation of the first word is in the beginning. The second word is bara, he created. And the third word is God. So in Hebrew, it makes sense. In the beginning, God created. But in Greek or even in English, it sounds like beginning created God, heaven forbid. So they were concerned, the sages were concerned that Talmai is going to misuse this and say there was some kind of deity called Bereshis who created God. Look at the words. So they changed it. They changed the order, right? God created in the beginning instead of saying in the beginning God created. Now, the miraculous thing was that they all made the same change. And it wasn't just one change. It was 13 different places where there were changes, and without them communicating with each other, they all made the same changes. Similar type of stuff. It was a miracle. But they still saw it as a very terrible thing. They saw it as the day when the golden calf was constructed. They considered it to be that terrible. Why? Because once it was translated in that way, in that manner, in the forced translation, it allowed for room for it to be misused, unfortunately, and it was misused over the generations, interpreted different ways, captured different, modified once it was translated that way. So therefore, this happened on the 8th day of Teves, 2 days ago, and that's one of the reasons why we fast today as well. In addition, this is the day when Ezra the Scribe died. And Ezra was the one who really, really encouraged the bringing back of the Jewish people to Israel after the destruction, and way after, and worked with them and inspired them and encouraged them to forsake their non-Jewish ways. Many of them were assimilating, many of them were intermarried, various different things, behaviors that they had. He was working with them that they should change their ways. And it was considered to be, obviously, it was a great loss when he passed on. So that was on the 9th of Teves. So technically, or there was even a consideration to have 3 days of fasting, the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th. However, our sages decided, thankfully, that this fast should be instituted only as 1 day, because they're so close to each other, and these 3 together, they'll be included in 1 day. The fasting, it'll, so to speak, do the job in 1 day instead of doing it in multiple 3 different days of fasting in a row, which is very difficult to do. Okay, let's get to our learning. So we're holding here in Yankov on Masechta Shabbos. So he says, talking about various different opinions of coming to visit someone that's sick on Shabbos. We know there's a mitzvah to visit the sick. And if you visit someone on Shabbos, what's the proper terminology? What should you say when you visit them? And the reason why this is a question, because we know we're not allowed to pray certain prayers on Shabbos. You don't ask for one's needs or things that bring up anguish and sadness, suffering. We try to avoid those topics on Shabbos. Shabbos is meant to be a day of enjoyment, and we avoid those things. Even the davening throughout the week, we daven many different prayers, and we ask for many different things, but things that are somewhat in the sad realm, we don't do it on Shabbos. But if you're coming to visit the sick, what should you say? God should heal you? What's the term that should be used that would be appropriate for Shabbos? So we brought several different opinions, but the point is, or the two aspects that it really brought out here was, number one, Shabbos has a certain quality to it, a certain holiness and aura that brings healing. So although a person doesn't have to daven, beg in that sense, it's not necessary, although he can't, it's not necessary because Shabbos itself will provide it. Shabbos, by just the virtue of the fact that it's Shabbos, it will bring healing and make this person feel better. Okay? It's the power of Shabbos. Then we had an interesting discussion about sages who went up together with Rabbi Eliezer to visit the sick. And when they went with him, they observed several different things. In general, some sages made it a point to start with the word shalom and end with the word shalom in their expressions. Shalom meaning peace. It's also one of Hashem's names, one of the ways to refer to Hashem. But sometimes he would say, Hashem should remember you in Hebrew, Hamakim yifkadcha l'shalom, and sometimes he would say, Hamakim yidkirinach l'shalom. Hashem should remember you, but using an Aramaic word. And the Gemara asked the question.
Why would they do this?
So the whole Talmud is in Aramaic, and it was common. That was the language that they spoke. It's like Yiddish to Hebrew. Aramaic became, it was written in the Hebrew alphabet, and it became a mundane, a language of talking mundane things, not prayer for the most part. So the question is, why did he sometimes use the Aramaic term if we have a teaching that the heavenly angels, they don't know Aramaic? So there's no point to ask your personal needs in Aramaic. It's actually not so effective because you want the malachim, the angels, to bring the tefillos all the way to Hashem. And when you say it in Aramaic, they don't understand it. And yet, Rabbi Eliezer did that. So the one answer is that this is, when it comes to an ill person, it's different, because when someone is not well, we have this in this week's parsha as well, where when Yosef came to visit Yaakov, who was passing away, it says that the Shekhinah, the reference, the Shekhinah was there, God's presence, because when a person is not well, Hashem is there to support him, to help him, to heal him. Hashem is there. So normally, when it comes to personal matters, you don't talk in Aramaic. However, when it is talking about an ill person, then Aramaic would work, because the Shekhinah is right there. You're not using angels to carry the prayers, so to speak, to Hashem. Now, to clarify and reiterate that we daven to Hashem. It's just that there are many angels that are pushing and praying also to Hashem on our behalf, and they're associated with it. So it speaks about doing it specifically in Hebrew, not in Aramaic, unless it's an ill person who is, in this case, the Shekhinah is right there. You're not even using, so to speak, the angels. I'm going to stop for Maider. See you guys willing tomorrow.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Warning about the pot.
High carbs? Or?
No, I dropped